Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everybody, depending on where you're at. This is Lars Light from the Somm Journal, and on behalf of our publisher, Editor-in-Chief Meredith May, our sponsors, National Geographic, publisher of New Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia, and the Somm Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to the latest in our Winery Close-Ups webinar, Phenolics, Colors, Taste, and Tannins. I think it's actually Tannins and Taste, but we're pretty good. We're live now on Facebook. And this is also going to be recorded and available on the Somm Journal website. And I believe, Lynn, also through the Somm Foundation, you'll be able to get a link there. And we got some great information coming for you. We're also working very closely with the program Somm Geo, which is a fantastic, what I like to say, connection between where Google Earth meets the wine world. So today's theme, phenolics. Phenolics have a tremendous impact on wines. You know, they can impact, the phenolic compounds impact color, taste, and mouthfeel. They're present in skins, pulps, and seeds, but they're not dispersed evenly. So the different types of phenolic compounds show up in different places. They can be influenced by canopy management, vinification, maceration, of course, and even wood aging. There are two main groups of phenolic compounds. You have flavonoids, which include anthocyanins, which have a big impact on color, and even tannins. And then non-flavonoids, which are resveratrol, which makes the wine heart healthy for us, and phenolic acids. So we're going to take a trip around the phenolic world right now. And I'm going to ask Greg Van Wagner to give us a quick overview using the Somm Geo platform to tell us where we're going.
Thank you so much, Lars. It's great to be here. We've got wineries from around the world. Let's see, 2 different states, 3 different continents, and then even cross over the Atlantic Ocean. I hope you all have a chance to check out the Somm Geo tour for this event. If not, it's on the Somm Foundation website, and that'll be up for a little bit, at least a week after this event as well. So feel free to check that out as you'd like. And this tour, it's an example that we made really for this event of a much larger platform. So Somm Geo does tours of all the notable wine regions of the world, big globe, as well as classic maps that you can check out. But today we'll be heading through Washington. So I'll take us over there. That's where we'll be kicking it off. So we're gonna go into Washington, down through, we'll go to Sonoma, we'll head over into Napa, we'll head down to Paso Robles. We'll go over the equator down to Argentina, Mendoza specifically, and then we'll hop both the Atlantic as well as the equator again and head over to Italy. But we'll kick it off. We'll basically go north and then head down south and then towards the east. So we'll start it off in Washington. So here we have the Columbia Valley, which is really, you know, the Cascade Mountains are really what makes this a big part of it. Forms the rain shadow as well as really impacts the weather throughout. You can see Mount Rainier right there. And now headed over, Red Mountain specifically, this has really become ground zero for top flight cab in Washington. Really definitely a coveted place for Bordeaux blends and definitely kind of sits at the top of most any producer's portfolio. Now headed over to Clipson Vineyard. This is one of the earliest and original named vineyard sites in the valley, and you'll often see this done as a vineyard designate wine, and with great reason. And with that, I'm excited to check these out, so hand it back to Lars.
Thank you very much, Greg. And before I actually pass the ball over to Brian, the winemaker at Canvasback, I do want to ask, I forgot to mention this earlier, but you've all got great reasons besides the fantastic information that's coming out to you. There's a couple of incentives to pay even more attention. So Lynn Fletcher, the CEO of the Somm Foundation, if you could tell us a little bit of some of the goodies in store for our audience.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lars, and thank you to the Somm Journal and all our panelists for making this event possible today, and Greg Van Wagner with Somm Geo. So after the event today, we're going to do a random drawing for 8 people to receive 1 year's access to Somm Geo. So we'll be announcing those later this afternoon. We also have an essay contest, a chance to win both a copy of the New Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia and a check for $400. So within the next 24 to 48 hours, we'll be sending out a prompt via email to all of you on the webinar today with the essay question. We'd like you to submit your essays by midnight on July 20th. And we'd like you to limit them to 500 words. All the instructions will be included in the email. But again, the first and second place will win a copy of the New Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia, and first place gets a check for $400 that they can use towards their wine studies. So I will say, I know essays take a little more time and effort than true and false questions, but put the effort in, and we'll take a look at your responses, and we'll get back to you by July 28th with the winners. And with that, I'll pass it back to Lars.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynn. I got to tell you something. I think the biggest challenge of writing this essay is going to be limiting it to 500 words, because there's going to be so much great information coming at you. And some of that great information is going to start from Brian Rudin, the winemaker for Canvasback. Brian is a native of Washington. He graduated from West Washington University. He worked at a restaurant, the 6-7 restaurant, right, Brian, in Seattle?
Right.
You were on a trip to Napa when you got the wine bug, and came back to Washington to get your degree in enology and viticulture, and even went the step of becoming a certified somm, like so many of our audience. So we're anxious to hear what you have to say, and I know that you've got a great general presentation, but I think we're probably all curious to know how the heat wave up north in the Northwest is affecting your vineyards, and particularly when it comes to phenolics. So please.
And thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be with this group. The heat has been crazy. You know, we were 118 degrees in Walla Walla. We got up to 117 degrees in Red Mountain. The trick to surviving heat like this is to get a suntan before you get a sunburn. So you want early light on clusters, expose the canopy early. Thankfully, we had an early start to the season, and we were in pretty good shape by the time it came along. It's funny, the place where I've seen some of the most adverse heat effects are in cool vineyards that are on average 20 degrees cooler than our warm sites. And those cool sites went from cool sites to very hot sites very quickly, and that surprised vines, and we saw a little bit of leaf scorching there. But I think we're in good shape for the rest of the season. This all happened before Verasion, so fingers crossed we have a good one. It reminds me a little bit of 2015, and we were able to make beautiful, balanced wines in 2015 despite some real midsummer heat like this.
That's pretty courageous to actually take some canopy off right now. You really got to cross your fingers when you do that.
That's exactly right. It's timing is everything. We try to get to it as early as possible.
Yeah. All right. So.
Well, I'll start my presentation. Thanks for having me. So phenolics, look, this topic is so important. It's the bare building blocks of mouthfeel. And when you get it right, when you work this refinement, you work towards just getting a pure, more noble expression of whatever it is you're trying to communicate. You know, think about wines as a way that you can travel from your dinner table. You get to experience exotic places, faraway lands, exotic aromatics and foreign textures via the wines we drink. And for us, the wine community, it enriches us to know the history and the geography of that place. It's the core of what we do. So I think about terroir like language. You can hear different regional dialects within it. There's patterns that fall within a certain country and sub-dialects. And to me, phenolics is more like great usage, clean, perfect grammar and elocution. And so it's the clearly spoken language within whatever its dialect is. That's what phenolics is. It gives us a more pure, cleaner, and more precise expression of what we're trying to do. Let me jump in first with a little bit about who we are, and I'll tell you what we do at Canvasback in the phenolics world, and we're going to get right down to the meat and potatoes as quickly as possible on this. This is Red Mountain. Canvasback, we are the Duckhorn Portfolio's investment in Washington State. We started in 2012, our first venture outside of the state of California. I grew up my entire wine career, and most of my life has been in Washington State. And I'm very proud to be able to get to represent this region with a portfolio like this. You know some of our other brands: Duckhorn, Decoy, Paradox, Goldeneye, Migration, Costa Brown as of 3 years ago, and Calera. It's an amazing portfolio of very talented individuals, dedicated wineries, and I'm glad to be able to be part of this group. Red Mountain is one of the smallest AVAs in Washington State and one of the very warmest. It's critical location for us for Cabernet Sauvignon because it has a very long growing season. You know, we're up at 46 degrees latitude north. We're very far north, and there's a lot of places at this latitude that cannot ripen Cab. But at our latitude, there's some places that you recognize. We're at the exact same latitude as Bordeaux, the Northern Rhone, most of Lombardy, the Veneto, Barolo, and Barbaresco. So sun comes up at the same time, goes down at the same time, and it ends for very long days. What's different about out here in Red Mountain AVA is how far inland we are. You can see on this quick map, we're in the middle of a very brown patch. We have no maritime influence, which means no fog. And we barely have clouds in the sky. We have about 320 days of unabashed sunshine. And at this latitude, the sun comes up, you know, around midsummer, 5:10 in the morning, goes down around 9:40. And that's what midsummer looks like. It's very intense, very direct sunlight. This is not foggy Stag's Leap or Barbaresco by any measure. So what that does, all that intense heat and sun creates for powerful phenolics. And we get light on clusters early on, they get intense, and we make sure that we build a lot of tannin and a lot of anthocyanin during the growing year. Some quick images to give you a sense of the topography. This is just coming out of the Cascade Mountains. That's my dog Neto, he's a good boy. And you can see we're starting to get dry here. This is right outside the Ancient Lakes AVA. It's a full-blown desert. Folks, Eastern Washington is 3 times drier than Phoenix. Wow. It's a full-on desert. But what happens is we have a confluence of some of North America's great rivers right in the middle of our basin. So we're dry, protected by these mountains at this northerly latitude with all this water available to us for irrigation. So we do irrigate, we need to, but it gives us the ability to be precise. Red Mountain. So what Red Mountain does well, particularly in Washington, is Cabernet Sauvignon. And it does so because of our elevation advantage, our southwestern exposure, and our exposure to dry, warm winds. Powdery mildew is really hard to inflict upon yourself. You have to really get crazy with the water to do it, but we're pretty dry, and it helps a lot with pest control. You can see in the dry desert landscape, this is not Sonoma. So phenolics, let's get right down to it. These are the building blocks of texture. You can do a lot with bricks. Now I have to make a caveat here. This is not my metaphor, but I'm going to run with it. I'm not the author of it, but it's perfect. Tannin and anthocyanins, they are bricks. And bricks are all about what you shape them into. You can have a big stupid pile of bricks in your front yard doing you or nobody or your neighbors any good, or you can shape them into something sleek, elegant, and useful. So our job in the winery is to shape these building blocks into something gorgeous for your palate. Okay, that's the 2-minute warning. The basic pieces, anthocyanin, this is color. Listen guys, we talk about color a lot in wine, but it's not just cosmetic. Color is a critical building block in mouthfeel. And so anthocyanin does degrade quickly in a must. And so we have to act quickly in order to keep it. When you make bound antho, which is polymeric pigment, it feels amazing on your palate. This is the juice. It's that soft, slippery, plush, beautiful mouthfeel. It's like 2 unicorns making love on your palate when you get it just right. Tannins, polymers. These come out into alcohol and exponentially so towards the end of fermentation once alcohol gets high. So you have to really watch it. You know, everyone talks about tannins sometimes as it can come off in a negative context, but they're critical for the palate weight of the wine and the shape of the wine. When you have too many tannins and not enough antho to support it, it ends up in sandy, abrasive, very drying tannins. And so under the right conditions, we really want to form short chain polymers end capped with anthocyanin. That's what makes for that really slippery, really plush mouthfeel. Aldehyde, again, another 4-letter word in the world of wine. You know, outside of deliberately oxidative wine styles, you know, we think of aldehyde as a flaw, except in very old wines. But we actually try to make aldehyde as much as we can early on in the wine's life with robust reds, because it's critical in making polymeric pigment. And if you do it right and you generate enough aldehyde early on by oxidizing the easily oxidizable phenols, it'll actually give you greater oxidative resistance later in life. It's very counterintuitive, and it takes a little bit of a leap of faith. It's like daycare. You know, if you take your kids to daycare when they're 2, everybody in the family gets sick for 2 years, but then after that, you're good. Now that was my metaphor pre-COVID. We'll see how that pans out here in the next year. But you got to get inoculated against the wear and tear of oxidation, and early is good. And aldehyde is the mortar that joins anthocyanin to tannin polymers. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to finish on our winemaking concepts. We try and push early oxidation in these wines, and we really manage our ferments to make sure that we're pulling out the right volume of anthocyanins to our tannin ratio. So it requires a lot of care, and every single ferment is different. So we have to measure this in order to get it right. You can do it intuitively because you can watch your color and you can taste for tannin, but it really helps to back it up with hard science. I'll finish up on these notes. We work our macerations hard early for anthocyanin extraction, and then we slow down as we see tannin coming out. You have to really manage temperatures. Listen, you can't make good coffee and good tea with cold water, so you have to get warm in order to extract properly, but you have to be careful because you go too far, you're gonna burn your yeasts and stick your ferment, and then you've got hell to pay down the line. We blend early. We blend for shape and mouthfeel and color balancing, and we take a lot of patience to let our wine sit. I'm gonna wrap it up. We've got a lot of great information to hear. This is the tip of the iceberg, folks. Phenolics, don't ever stop learning. It's a wonderful thing to wrap your mind around, and it's not always intuitive. Thanks for listening.
Amen. Well done, Brian. Thank you very much. It was very insightful. So Greg, where are we going next?
We are headed over to Sonoma. All right. So Sonoma, we have a huge array of soils and climates, which really means you can have a wide variety of different grapes thrive here. I think they grow over 50 different varieties. Obviously, you're looking for cooler areas closer to the San Pablo Bay for your Burgundy varieties. But today we're talking more areas up towards the Alexander Valley, where we're going to visit one of the classic producers, Jordan. And Alexander Valley is a true specialist in Cabernet Sauvignon. And Jordan, throughout their time has really focused on Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's definitely one of the classics of the region. And with that, I'll hand it back to Lars.
Fantastic, thank you. And to talk to us is another person who is sort of like Brian was, a product of their terroir as much as their vineyards are. Dana Grande is the vineyard manager for Jordan Winery. She studied viticulture at UC Davis, another Sonoma native. So Dana, welcome. I know Dana's out on the road. She's going to be coming in from this cell phone connection. So wherever you are, Dana, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Great. So thank you so much for including me and for including the winery in the seminar today. I apologize, I'm phoning in. It's rather odd to be doing this completely blind, but I'm out at a lake house and there are no wireless capabilities here. So we have Alex back at the winery managing our slides. So let's just get started. Awesome. Next slide, Alex. So a little bit about me. I've been back at Jordan. I'm actually the grower relations manager. I take care of purchasing all of their grapes. I've been back since February of 2020. Prior to that, I was the vineyard manager at Jordan and their viticulturist for about 13 years. So next slide. The Jordan family has owned the winery for almost 50 years. Our first vintage was the 1976 Cabernet Sauvignon. Second generation vintner John Jordan, he stays true to the initial focus of our founding. We produce two wines, a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Chardonnay, and we produce the best we can each and every vintage. Jordan's really known for their consistency in their wines, producing wines that are balanced and elegant, food friendly, and we have a focus on fruit and acidity driving our wines. And today I'm going to focus on the practices that keep our wines in balance. So next slide. I'm going to be focused actually on fruit thinning in the vineyard. We could talk for hours about canopy management, irrigation management, and the impacts that those have on phenolics. But today I actually want to focus on fruit thinning. So next slide. So each year, ideally, grapevines set a bit more fruit than they need. And we plan for that crop when we prune. We decide how many buds we're going to leave on each vine, and we hope that we have the cluster numbers and the size that's going to allow us to further kind of tinker with the vine's perfect state of balance. So I want a bit more fruit at the beginning because I want our growers to be able to thin off any clusters that are underripe that are congested in the fruit area. I want growers to hold back on any early irrigation so that the berries stay on the smaller side. I don't look for really large berries because they have these thin flavors without a nice weight, nice mouthfeel. But we don't look for tiny berries either that are more heavily tannic, mostly seed and skin. We look for some balance in there as well on size. So I want to see vines that are slowing in their vegetative growth right now. When I see that, I go and I start having conversations about how the fruit is laid out in the fruit zone and what our growers need to do with regards to thinning. So next slide. Our first pass on thinning is what I call the crop adjustment pass. So hopefully we have the fruit that we need. Hopefully we have more than what we need. And right now the vines are slowing. The clusters are still green. The berries are hard. We're pre-veraison. So I go in and I ask growers to focus on removing any fruit that is stacked up, clumped up. It's just not laid out on the vine nicely. I always come in and I say, I want them to be free. So we look at weaker vines as well. Vineyards are a bunch of individuals, right? So we look at the weaker vines, we thin them to their capacity, and we focus on the balance of the individual vine. This is all done on an individual basis. We don't have an ideal number of clusters per vine. Each vine is kind of a unique being, and we take it as such. Next slide. So our final pass for thinning is what we call the green drop or veraison thinning. And we wait until the fruit's colored to about 90%. We remove all of the underripe clusters at that time. And this green drop pass is for uniformity within the vine row. So we've got the crop adjustment pass, and then we have the uniformity pass. And what we're looking for there is full ripening of flavors, full coloring, and balance on that vine. It's going to get to the finish line in a way where it's going to be able to fully express the site and what types of flavors we're expecting from those sites. Next slide. So in the winemaking, Maggie and I talk about this all the time. We're kind of boring. We like the fruit to be expressed in the vineyard, and we take great care to coax that along in our vinification rather than to maybe try and change things. So Maggie Cruz, our winemaker, she's often in the vineyard. She tastes every lot of grapes multiple times before the fruit actually arrives for crushing at the winery. She understands what these vineyards are capable of producing and what they've produced prior. She knows how the tannins are balanced with the other flavor components of the wine, and she manages these accordingly during fermentation. Sometimes she's going to leave the fermentations on their skins a bit longer. She's going to extract a bit more from the site. Sometimes she's going to press off a little earlier. And whatever decision she makes, it's based on tasting each lot every day. She's beginning to kind of form the pieces of the final blend early on, understanding what each wine lot brings to the finished bottle. Next slide. So for the purposes of this conversation, I'm actually talking about our 2016 Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's ideal, really. It's the ideal vintage to taste or to experience as I describe what we do in the vineyard. The vines did set a bit more fruit that year. A crop adjustment pass was important and was needed in most vineyards. And in 2016, bloom and veraison happened very, very quickly. And the color change and the softening happened quickly. So we had to be in there, and our timing had to be perfect for the uniformity pass. This wine really has that beautiful structure. The tannins are really lovely. The mouthfeel on this wine is actually, it's one of my favorite wines. It's got a great fruitiness. It's got the flavors that we're looking for, but really what I love about this wine is the mouthfeel. The structure, the richness, and it's because these vines were balanced. Next slide. And that's pretty much all I've got today. Please feel free to contact us if you want more information. Alex will be here to answer any questions in the chat. And thank you again for having us.
Great. I have a fast question for you, Dana, before you go.
Yeah.
If you can give us a rough idea, how many in your grow relations program, how many growers are you dealing with? And then I guess
I have about 25. Yeah,
Okay.
I have about 25, mostly reds, but we buy, our Chardonnay is 100% Russian River. We don't own any vineyards in the Russian River Valley, so that's purchased 100%.
And is there a tremendous variation when you have, let's say, when you're managing your phenolics, and obviously there are phenols in white wines as well. When you manage the phenols with your growers, do you get a tremendous variation, or is it pretty much a uniform request or standard for you?
Each vineyard is different, and each vintage is different, obviously. So I'm making decisions by block with our growers. With regards to the Chardonnay, I focus a lot on, we can get really foggy, kind of wet mornings in the Russian River Valley, especially in August, which makes me a little nervous with regards to botrytis or rot. I focus on cluster microclimate, basically, nice airflow, nice movement through. Canopy management is very different in our Chardonnay vineyards than it is in our Cabernet vineyards, obviously. But we do like a little more leaf. We like them to be a little more shaded. So if you've got any kind of fruit stacking, clumping, you do have more potential for poor airflow through that canopy, which can lead to problems. But flavor development, we like them to come slow and to retain the acidity that we're looking for in our Chardonnay in particular.
Great. All right. Thanks, Dana. Enjoy that country house.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Right. Great. Greg, what's our next stop on this phenol tour?
Well, we are in Sonoma again. Really great shot here of the coastal vineyards of Sonoma. We have the San Pablo Bay. And we're actually headed back up to the Alexander Valley. But we're going to Goldschmidt Vineyards. You can see their winery in Dry Creek Valley. But we're going to one really special vineyard here in the Alexander Valley. And this is really just a beautiful site to check out. Really, really incredible. So I'm excited to check these out as well and hand that back to Lars.
Fantastic. So Nick Goldschmidt is a native of Auckland, New Zealand, as we'll hear shortly from his accent, no doubt. He studied viticulture in Australia, worked in New Zealand, and then California and in Chile, consults for a number of wineries and has around the world over the years. Works in 7 countries and owns vineyards in 3. And I understand, Nick, that you two are coming to us remotely today. You're not in California, are you?
I'm in the Maipo Valley, man.
Fantastic. Nice.
So yeah, I'm down here in Chile in quarantine, along with about 3 other friends that were all playing indoor sports.
Sounds like fun. All right, we'll take it away. Tell us about your.
Let me take it away. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, I'm Nick Goldschmidt. I'm a winemaker from New Zealand. And like Michael Scholes that you hear later, our accents are slightly different, but we've both trained in Australia. But I've made Cabernet and Napa Sonoma now for over 30 years. These are the wines I'm going to be talking about today. Specifically, it's a single vineyard that we call Yeoman. We make 2 wines from there. One's called Plus and one's called Straight Yeoman. The vineyard is an east-facing slope. You can see that the outside rows here are a little bit more vigorous, and that's where we make the Plus from, which is a different winemaking process to the phenols and the tannins that we get from the main part of the Piedmont slope right here in the Alexander Valley. It's pretty hard to summarize in a short time. I've been making Cabernet for 40 years to put this into a 7-minute slot, but the bottom line for me really is color. As wines move from purple to red to brown to orange as they age, how do we keep these wines in the primary color for the longest period of time? And then in terms of taste, the tannin is the preservative. So how do we maintain this fruitiness by using the tannin as that preservative and keeping the tension and the nerve and the brightness in Cabernet, which is really a symbol of the youth of the wine. So it's totally complicated. And how do we age a wine? I think Brian he touched on this a little bit, but we try and age the wine fairly quickly when it's on skins and when it's young, when it's protected. And later on, if we see the crusty stuff on the inside of the bottle, for me, that's a sign of aging and the preservative of the wine that's falling apart. So that's less interesting. So time is the key. When do we do the extraction and how do we protect the wine while it's on skins? And we need to take advantage of that. So firstly, how do we maximize these tannins in the vineyard? Obviously, smaller berries. Andrea talked a little bit about that. We don't want them to be tiny berries, but we do want them to be smaller berries so that we get a higher skin to pulp ratio. Obviously, drought can allow us to do that, but also cane pruning, using some of these old heritage clones, or heritage field selections, which I'm a big fan of, rather than the modern clones that are used today, which are select basically for yield and fast sugar accumulation. So the age of the vine is really important as well. You get more balanced crop. We talk about 2 clusters per shoot or per cane, but in an older vine, those clusters are generally smaller. The global standard is 2 clusters per vine, 13 leaves per shoot, 15 shoots per meter. But obviously, in an older vine, that is more in a natural balance, and we do very little in the vineyard after veraison. Secondly, the timing and the onset of the harvest, which is a big focus for us today, is of course we're heading into these drought or these dry years, and these early springs mean that we get a potential for far more sunburn or sun exposure than we would typically want, because we are ripening during the period of July and August rather than the cooler months of October. This means faster sugar accumulation rather than flavor and tannin development, which puts the wines out of balance. In terms of wine, heat, light, air, and time are the things that make a big impact on maturity of tannins. So I look at changing my winemaking process in relation to the soil that I'm dealing with. I talk about tannins in terms of elegance, which are the softer, richer, rounder, juicier tannins that you get sort of from later ripening vineyards. The powerful vineyards are somewhere in between, and the dense vineyards, which I picked earlier, tend to provide the structure and the finish to the wines. And so those are the 3 sorts of wines that I look for. And of course, therefore, I extract them completely differently. And this is where site-specific winemaking comes about. So if you have a high tannin volume, which we do when we have smaller berries, I obviously extract the wines less, lower fermentation temperatures, shorter pump overs, less air. A great example would be obviously here in Colchagua in Chile, where we have a lot of dry tannins that we have to deal with. And then during maceration, we want to speed up the polymerization or speed up the unstable tannins, and so we use heat for that. So time on skins is important for all extractions to really make these wines as stable as possible. I've also noticed through time this discussion about dimers and trimers, which are sort of the mirror images of the tannin molecule or the polymer. So when a wine is young, you may have 80% of the tannin molecule in the dimer form and 20% in the trimer. And as the wines age, dimers become trimers or vice versa. And so that's the natural softening. So how do we find methods to push that tannin molecule or that mirror image into itself? So we have techniques, believe it or not, to do that these days. This is my favorite little chart here because it's in color. Yes, anthocyanins are flavanols, but at wine pH, these things are purple. There's a couple hydroxyl ions on that anthocyanin molecule that obviously join together, and you cleave off a water molecule, and that's how you end up with these big complexes that we call polymers or tannins, which are a larger group. But as I said, early on, these things can be dry and rustic. So how do we speed up that evolution to make these wines softer and more stable as the wines age? You can see here, this is a photo of berry from the Yeoman vineyard versus my Catherine vineyard. So this is a clone, and this is an old field selection. So you can see there's dramatic difference in berry size here. A normal Cabernet berry weighs about 0.95 grams, but in an old heritage selection, you can be down at 0.8 grams. And you can see the clusters are really loose compared with a clone. This is spur pruned rather than cane pruned. So you can see the clusters are much tighter and there's more of them, versus in the Yeoman vineyard, which is an old head pruned vineyard, a sort of a drought tolerant rootstock, very open clusters, etc., and primarily being cane pruned, which is also really important. There's a little chart I drew in my room last night when I had nothing to do between sports matches. So this is The amount of time we talk about from flowering to harvest, where you get veraison, acidity increases and decreases after veraison, sugar starts to accumulate and increase quickly. Flavor starts off a little bit lower and tannins move. And where these three things meet is we want to harvest. In Bordeaux, this is about 100 days, but in California, we're at about 120 to 140 days. Of course, this never happens because if you have a heavy crop, tannins take longer to ripen relative to flavor. And if you have a low crop, flavor takes longer to ripen relative to tannin. And with rain, we get dilution. If we get heat, we get dehydration. So it's quite complicated. And then in terms of my picking logistics, in an elegant vineyard, the fruit is in much higher concentration than the tannin. So we tend to pick it later because I always know it's going to be more fruity. Whereas in a dense vineyard, I'll pick the tannins can get out of control. So I typically pick that a little bit earlier because the canopies here tend to be bigger and the crop load's smaller. So I know that in a dense vineyard, I have to extract it a lot less than I do in an elegant vineyard. Hopefully the final blend is a little bit towards the elegant vineyard, but of course this is totally dependent on the vintage itself. So key elements and wrap up is, Piedmont, east facing, morning sun, drought tolerant rootstocks, lower yields, cane pruning, old vine. I mean, it's totally complicated to try and do this in 7 minutes, Lars. And then in the winery, trying to de-stem and not crush, so I get a slower onset of ferment using native yeast, which are also a little bit more slow, keeping the wine for a minimum of 4 weeks on skins, no additions, meaning no yeast food. And we were just lucky, Meredith just rated this wine last week, gave it 96 points, so we're very grateful for that. And if you want to come and see us, we're out in Dry Creek. Please follow us on Goldschmidt Vineyards. And this is all really completely bullshit because it's really up to my dogs that make all the decisions. And so I'm out here with my dogs all the time, so I can't even tell the difference between 23 and 24 bricks. But final decision is always up to the Ridgeback because she's the most sensitive and the princess of us all. Anyway, Lars, thanks for your time. Appreciate being on here, and thanks.
Great. I hope you
6 minutes and 52 seconds.
That's pretty impressive. Thank you, Nick. Fast question for you to fill up those other 25 seconds that are left for you. And again, try to do this in 25 words or less. I wish you luck. But without going into specifics, because we have a nice worldview here today, but you're doing this in a lot of different countries where you're consulting. Does it change much from country to country? And to Dana's point, every vintage is different, every vineyard is different. But does the general approach change much from country to country?
Absolutely, because we're missing one key element, and the key element is the personality. To be honest, I really don't think terroir exists. I think because terroir is influenced, firstly, if you irrigate, you're basically removing terroir. And secondly, the cultural aspect of the person making the wine is so important. Each person they live in a different environment, they eat different foods, they hang out with different people. You know, when I was a chief winemaker for Allied Domecq, I gave 5 winemakers 10 tons of Cabernet. I made the picking decision on the vineyard. Each one of those 5 winemakers from across California made wine from those 10 tons. At the end of a year, we sat down and we drank those 5. We tasted those 5 wines from you guys know who these winemakers are. And guess what? They all tasted different. So, where does terroir come? So when you travel around the world, for instance, in 2 weeks, I'll be up in Okanagan, where I spend a lot of time versus where I'm making wine here in Maipo or in Moeco. You're talking about latitude, you're talking about climatic influence, but most importantly, we're missing the cultural aspect of what wine is about.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. Good, great information, Nick. Thank you very much. And again, happy quarantine. Hope it goes smoothly. So Greg, would you want to bring us to our next, what Nick would call non-terroir then?
Absolutely. So we are in Napa Valley. Definitely, when you're thinking Napa, this is the most internationally recognized wine region in the States, and definitely has a big part in the history of the American fine wine industry. Here we have the Valley Floor AVAs, just a couple that are on screen at the moment. We've got Oakville and Yountville, Rutherford up through St. Helena. But we're actually headed to a section of Napa that is maybe less commonly visited, but a really beautiful area. We're headed up to Dollarhide Ranch. of the San Superi estate. This is a former cattle and horse ranch. And then back to the actual winery itself, we're down in Rutherford, where we have another 35 estate vines, acres of estate vines here. And here we are. And back to Lars.
Fantastic. Thank you, Greg. So Michael Schultz is the VP of winemaking and vineyards at St. Superi. He grew up, as we just found out, at a family winery actually in Australia. He's worked at St. Superi in the 90s and returned in the 2000s. And you've worked in a few other places as well. So we're looking forward to hearing your perspective, Michael.
Perfect. Thank you, Lars. Yes, listen, I'm here at St. Superi today, and as you saw from the initiation to the presentation, that we have a property in Rutherford and we have the Dollarhide Ranch. At St. Superi here in Napa, we are an estate brand, so all of the wines we make come from one or a combination of those two locations, and they are unique to each other. But today we're sort of going to talk about this wine, which is our Dollarhide Cabernet Sauvignon. So we'll focus on that Dollarhide property, and we'll have a little bit of presentation of that property as we go. And the Dollarhide Ranch is pretty unique because it is a 1,500 acre property, of which 500 acres are planted to vines. So quite a large location, and it is kind of a valley within itself. And it is a high elevation location. So when I say high elevation, we grow everything from Sauvignon Blanc to Cabernet there. Of course, Sauvignon Blanc down low around the 600 to 700 feet of elevation. And then from there on up to about 1,100 feet, we grow Cabernet Sauvignon. As we climb through those elevations, we see our soils become more shallow, and there's a tremendous amount of variation on the property. And so we have 7 different soil series and 13 different variations. So, and that of course brings an enormous amount of variability to what we can do on this property. So when we talk about phenolic and structuring, texturing, density, and what have you, we have a load of different variations within the sites, within the property, just by the different elevations, exposures, and combinations we have. Nick alluded to old vines, and so we have a lot of old vines in this property when it comes to Cabernet Sauvignon, and there is some beauty to old vines. They do produce wines that have tremendous qualities within their phenolic structuring, and they tend to be consistent and very reliable. Our young vines can be similar as well, but of course, young vines take a little bit of time to mature. It's interesting, old vines come with old-fashioned viticulture. The young planters come with new viticulture, but the old vines tend to really be tremendous performers, and this one we're talking about today, the Dollarhide Cabernet Sauvignon, is predominantly off the old vine situation. However, of course, we have great hope for those younger plantings as we go forward. And you know, when we come to thinking about phenolics and structuring of our wines, we're talking about viticulture, predominantly site and location. I am a believer in terroir. I do think there's good reason to think that winemaking brings variation, because we all have a vision that's a little different to each other. But terroir does present a place, and we being a state, place is incredibly important to us. So we go through a bunch of cultural practices through the season, and the goal of those cultural practices is to build our wine. And I do think the building block for our wines starts in the vineyard, and the vineyard is the true expression of what we can achieve with phenolics. So we start you know, with our pruning, and we have a pruning down to a bud count, so we have a plan before the season even starts of what our vine will look like. Then we get into the growing season, and we'll get into the suckering area, where we'll pull back to the planned bud count. And from there on, as the season moves along, we'll start looking at cluster load. That will be a little dependent on what's happened during the flowering period. You know, if we have a good flowering, when we set a heavier crop, we will go and do a more significant cluster thin. And we're looking for separation between our clusters. And we're looking for a certain number of, certain sort of, not exactly a cluster per vine, but a balance per vine. However, if we have a situation where we've had a poorer set, we're going to make an adjustment to what we're doing. Equally, the type of season we'll have will have an impact on what we choose to do with removal of leaves. which we're a little bit conservative on. We do remove leaves, typically on one side of a plant, but we're not looking for a lot of direct exposure. We're looking particularly for a little bit of reflective exposure. Our belief is that that does improve the colour in the berry, that does allow the improved progression with our phenolic structuring, and so we're looking for that type of approach with that exposure. We'll come back and do further cluster adjustment as we get to veraison to take out those trailing clusters that may not be keeping up with the ripeness with the bulk of the vine. And that brings an evenness to the vine so that when we make a harvest decision for maturity, we have a much more even situation. At that time, when we do call a harvest, we're doing that at night to keep our fruit cold and maintains the condition of the berries in a great place to get all the way down to the cellar and into the fermenter. And in the meantime, we'll go through a sorting process, as you see here. And the sorting process will be a cluster sort followed by an optical sort. And depending on a season, if we have an uneven ripening season, we may actually go through with a hand sort behind the optical. And the goal here is to make sure that what we put into the tank is a very pure type of tank, a tank that has great maturity, similarity in colour, and condition of berries. So the optical sorter has proved to be a very valuable piece of equipment here because it allows us to pick shape, colour, and material out of the grapes, so we can do an elimination of all these. And the great thing about it is the good berries, of course, are untouched. That means that what leads to a fermenter is a very pure tank of grapes, a tank that can really have a great concentration of high quality structure. So that's our target, what we're trying to achieve. And when we get to a fermenter, we have a number of different options. So we have we do a lot of small lot fermentations. You see the concrete tanks here and then the oak vats in the background. So there are some of the fermenters we use. We also have stainless steel open tops, and then we do a lot of barrel fermentation as well. Each of these fermenters will give us different types and feels to our wine. And so if I put the same Cabernet in each of those fermenters, I'll get 4 different types of Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, as we go into a maceration situation during vinification, we will be measuring our phenolics. So we actually measure phenolics in-house, and we're looking at anthocyanin, tannin, and total phenolics, ion reactive phenols. And so we're looking to see how fast in a season we might be extracting, and that may have impact. There's a lot of things that have an impact on that. And we also, prior to going to ferment, we also check our berry size. We want to know how big our berries are and what impact that might have on the concentration of phenols. So we measure those phenols as we go through the fermentation. We'll see anthocyanin extract early on, and we'll see our tannins extract later in the ferment. We like to extract as much as we can early in the piece because we do believe we get, at the end of the day, more concentration with more plush, gentle wines. So we look for that and we go on through there. At that point, we will bring our wines out to barrel. Of course, there's a lot of, I guess I've eliminated to talk about temperature. During a fermentation, we're looking at incorporation of oxygen. We're looking at our temperatures. It was mentioned earlier, too much temperature can cause negative dynamics during the fermentation, but we want to push temperatures as best we can to extract our anthocyanins, tannins, and our total phenols to achieve that. Once we get that done, we go down to barrel. We try to keep temperature up before malolactic fermentation to maintain the complexing and binding of those tannins, because if we can do that, we can build those tannins not only during the ferment, but after ferment, and complex them, so therefore increase the density of what we feel on the mouth. But as we complex them, we can make those tannins feel a little softer. The bigger the molecule, the softer it tends to become. Then we go into the barrels, we go through our maturation stage and several rackings that goes through the life of the wine to about 15 months of age in the wine, where we start doing our blending. At the point of blending, we blend to blend for taste. However, at that point, we do look at our phenolics again and where they progress through the maturation period to make sure that we're getting the type of wine we want for the style we're doing. And when I say that, that's relative. We look at phenolics and the size of the wine for the style of what we're doing. We know what we tend to do from year to year. There is variation from season to season, But we have consistent management, consistent blocks, consistent plants that all of these wines come from. So we have a pretty good feel from what blocks will achieve what wines. But we do follow that through, and that phenolic monitoring sort of aids our decisions in blending. But at the end of the day, we're trying to make a wine that is just tastes fantastic for that wine, that style. So that's essentially what we're trying to achieve here at St. Cyprian.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. Again, tough to condense in a short amount of time, but thank you. And then we're also going to have to resume the great terroir debate another time as well. But I think to the point, I know that Nick said it has a lot to do with winemakers. They're part of the terroir too, aren't they? So fantastic. Greg, bring us a little bit further south.
Absolutely. We're going to continue our march down south in California, down to the Central Coast. We have Paso Robles, an area that sits right behind the Santa Lucia range and really is known for Cabernet as well as Rhone varieties equally well, but definitely finds a home in these, phenolic reds. They are able to, so these Santa Lucia mountains, cool air basically comes into them from the Pacific where it pushes up and turns into rain. But they can get through a gap in the Templeton Gap District. And basically what that does means the western side of Paso is always going to be a little bit cooler and rainier, although a lot of that rain typically falls in the winter. Here we have Hope Family Wines, really sitting on a great estate right in the foothills of the region. Beautiful, beautiful. And back to Lars.
All right. Thank you very much. So we're going to hear from J.C. Diefenderfer of Hope Family Wines. JC grew up in Templeton, just south of Paso, on a family ranch. So no stranger to agriculture for sure. And he went to high school with Austin Hope. And he's been with Austin Hope and Hope Family Winery since 1998, and works very closely with Austin Hope to craft the blends of the house. So JC, welcome, and talk to us about what's going on at Paso.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So far, it's been a great presentation. So a little bit quickly about us. We're Hope Family Wines. Like you said, Austin and I have worked together since we were like 12 years old and schlepping wine out of the tasting room. Grew up in agriculture. I'm a fifth generation Paso Robles. So, we kind of know the land around here. And so who we are, we're made up of 5 different wineries within our group. We have the Austin, we have Liberty School, which we took over in 1996, as well as Triana, which is one of our flagships. The Austin Hope Cabernet, which is what I'll be focusing on today a little bit more of. Triana Red, the Quest, and of course, Troublemaker. Pretty much all these wines here are centrist around the Cabernet grape, except for Troublemaker, which is the Rhones. And we'll get a little bit more about, what makes Paso special for all these things and where they go. Why Paso Robles, where we're at. So we are exactly between LA and San Francisco. So we're about 3 hours from each, about 207 miles. Paso Robles is the largest aviation within the Central Coast region. So we're about 614,000 acres. We have about 40,000 acres planted in grapes, and Cabernet is king here. It's the largest planted. A few years back, we broke up Paso Robles to really focus on the different areas and the subregions. So we have 11 sub-AVAs within Paso. What makes it special? A lot of it is climate. So diurnal temperature swings. Typically, during the summer months, we can have 105 during the day and 50 at night. So, it's a big swings of 50, 60 degrees on diurnal swings. Rainfall, like you said, on the kind of the west side there, we can have 40, 50 inches of rain. On the east side, it can average 6 inches. So very dramatic swings there. Topography, ground, soils really show it there. We do have a lot of diversification on soils. We talk a little bit about limestones. More is calcareous, not really active limestones like you'll have up north. And then the varietals, Cabernet is king. There is over 60 varietals here. So there's a lot of focus on Rhones on the west side. There's a lot of cooler areas, Templeton Gap, The Salinas Valley kind of flows through there. So our soils, and I'll be focusing mainly on kind of our 4 regions there that we work with for the Austin Hope Cabernet. So Adelaide District is kind of on the west side there. You see the upper west side. That is, you know, you look at it, you're closest to the ocean, but it is one of the warmest regions within the Pass Robles, mainly because it's kind of blocked. There's the mountain range, the San Lucio Range right there that blocks it off from the ocean influence. A lot of the heavy rocks, well-drained soils, the heat in the day, it kind of cools a little bit later in the afternoon. Typically we'll get cooling around 4 o'clock, and that area will cool a little bit later. The Estrella District, so right in the center top there, that's more of the plains area. There's a little heavier soils there, a little bit more clays. And then we'll go down a little bit to Geneseo, and that's what we'll focus on a little bit on the vineyards there. Geneseo is kind of at the Y where we both come in the flow. And it's hard not to use my hands too much here and can't really show it on the map there, but you see the ocean down below. We'll have the flows coming in there versus the Salinas Valley coming off the top. The Geneseo is kind of the Y where the flows come together and flow out to the east there. And then the Crescent District down below is a little bit more of the mountainous region. When we say mountainous, we're a low of 700 and a high of 1800. So we're not really big mountainous, but it's the flow is what really gives a little bit there. Soil wise, we do have 2 major, we do have 2 major fault lines on both sides of us. So a lot of Pass Robles is new soils, the calcareous soils. There is a lot of, it's seabed basically where we're at. So you'll find a lot of whale bones, shells, and everything else, even though we're about 30 miles inland of the ocean. With those calcareous soils, we do have a lot of high pHs, which do have a lot of influence in the wine. So the vineyard I'm talking about today is, and sorry if I'm talking fast here, I'm trying to keep going my 7 minutes. We're a Ware vineyard, and it's right in the middle there, well-drained soils. And it was a lot of great information between Nick and Ryan earlier, how all those things come together and what makes everything blend together. This is what I kind of consider my glue of a lot of the wines. So we're talking about tannin extraction. They're great on the phenolic compounds and everything else and where we get them from. I also look at it as we're trying to get full extraction of these different areas. And what puts those wines together is kind of the glue that puts it together. So I look at tannins and extraction a little bit differently. I'm looking both on flavors, but also on data. I do focus on color extraction. So we're looking at absorbencies to get our numbers. So we'll pull different panels on absorbencies that goes into equation, as well as the tasting. So we'll do microferments prior to harvest. Those microferments really tell us what the grapes are going to do during the harvest. And then from that, we will break those down and ferment our wines differently and then blend together at the end. So our different wines, yeah. So our different wines and is what we're doing is pulling each ferment, breaking down the Tannins ferment. We talked a little bit the aldehydes earlier. We try to do longer on the skins, get higher aldehydes in the beginning. What those aldehydes do is break down the early compounds, allow our wines to show better earlier. And then from that, we blend together and create the wines. So other than that, vineyards mixing, long fermentations, and then we do a little bit differently. We talked about lower temperatures. We do run a little bit higher temperatures here. We'll run about the 85s. Sorry about that. And my little warning sign. We do run about 85 degrees on our temperatures, trying to get higher extractions. Paso, because we have those diurnal temperature swings, we have a lot of tannins colors in the skins. So with that, trying to get those bound during fermentations and extract early is kind of where it mixes together.
Very cool. Thank you very much, JC.
Thank you.
All right. So Greg, should we cross the equator?
Yeah, so we're crossing the equator. We're going down to Argentina, a country that's seen really incredible success on the international stage in really just a handful of decades. This country, as we often hear, is synonymous with Malbec. And honestly, you're more likely to see it here than in the birthplace in Cahors. So I'd really argue that Argentina is kind of, really leading the grape stylistically. And so we're going down to Mendoza, huge area. So it's important to be very specific about where these are coming from. Up here in the Yuco Valley, very, very different than, say, Eastern Mendoza. And, you higher altitudes here, you don't really see these like supercharged versions that you sometimes may see in Luan Boyo. And now we're headed down to Bodega Alto Cedro. So basically everything here, really, really high elevation. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, we're up over 1,000 meters. Definitely a great place for Malbec, and Alto Cedro is definitely an innovator in the realm, and I'm interested to hear what we have going on there.
Fantastic. So we're going to welcome Karim Moussi Safieh, who's the winemaker at Alto Cedro. Karim's family has been in the wine business for over 30 years. And Karim, in your bio, it says you're obsessed with the purity of fruit. So talk to us about that purity, how you find it in Argentina, and how it's impacted by phenolics.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lars, and everybody at the Somm Foundation and Somm Journal for having us here. We feel a little bit awkward being on the southern part of the world in the middle of the winter. I just arrived from the United States and I'm in quarantine in my home, so we have to put this fake background because I can't go to the winery until Friday. So thank you for having us. We're very happy to share what is happening in this part of the world, because we have a lot of similarities and things that also make Argentina very unique in general, especially for all the Andean provinces that we grow grapes on the right side of the Andes. So I will start sharing my screen where we have the presentation. Give me a second. 2, 1, 0. And one second. There we are. Are you watching the presentation right now?
Yes, we see it.
Oh, sorry. Here we are. So here we have the maps. As you can see, Argentina, it's a big country where all the provinces at the foothills of the Andes on the right side of the mountains, we share the same growing conditions. We have a continental weather in these high mountain deserts, where we are completely insulated from the Pacific Ocean influence, from the Atlantic Ocean, because we are very far away, and completely insulated from the Pacific because the huge wall that split us from Chile. So while all the humidity remains on the Chilean side, Mendoza is one of these big high mountain deserts. As you can see on the map of the right, our province, our state is still a desert where only 4 oases are allowed to grow something, not only grapes, thanks to the 4 mountain rivers that bring the water from the melting snow. So you have the Northern Valley, the East Valley, the South Valley, and the purple stamp, it's the Uco Valley. The Uco Valley, it's formed by 3 counties. You have Tupungato in the north, Tunuyani in the middle, and San Carlos in the south. San Carlos is the oldest county in the province because it used to be the border between the native Indians and the Spanish colony. And inside the San Carlos County, you have this beautiful place called La Consulta that also has a very weird name because it's where our governor and a national hero made a consulting to cross the Andes. So in La Consulta, that is a very well-known area, you have two big formations. The red triangle is the alluvial cone that formed by the Tunuyán River, where most of the Italian growers remain planting Malbec. And the second formation on the south is a different geological formation. It's called El Cepillo. It's a colluvial cone, like two landslides together between choppestone and sand, where the Spaniards came later, and they, in this very cold area, they replaced the Malbec for Tempranillo because the high risk of frost. So we have two big formations, mostly Malbec and Bordeaux varietals in the north, and El Cepillo in the south, mostly with Tempranillo. The thing that we have here that makes this area very unique, it's what Brian masterfully explained at the very beginning. I really like the way that he explained all the phenols management, because in a place like this one, where vines grows in a kind of paradise, we are at the perfect level of efficiency in terms of phenol concentration. The thing is, where normally we have between tannins and anthocyans a ratio of 5 to 1 or 1 to 5, here in La Consulta we have much more concentration of anthocyans. So we always need to ask help for additional tannins from the oak. So here the oak regimes and the vineyard management, the harvest date, the macerations, the temperature of fermentations, and the barrel aging are the key factors, like everywhere, to build that beautiful building using the proper bricks, or putting the proper bricks to create those polyphenols that permit us to create very elegant wines, concentrate but elegant, with a lot of balance and a very bright acidity. So this is like La Consulta look like on the flat map. But if we go to the next one, here you can see all the other properties that we manage, that we own or that we run, those 17 vineyards that permit us to cover the whole La Consulta appellation. From the very north, so from the very south in El Cepillo, Altamira on the west, where we have very short rocky soils, to the most loamy deep soils of Chacon. That makes La Consulta very unique. We are 100% sustainable farming, growing. We have a green building, a centennial winery from the 19th century, gravity fed, low interventions, certified low intervention, because we manage all these things that we mentioned about how we play with those phenols on the best way possible, thanks to one of the great tools that we have there, that are our old small concrete tanks. So in general, that permits us to have the whole berries, to work with the whole berries during the whole process, and having the benefit of the very gentle, soft extraction from those phenols. Then the tannins and the anthocyans start playing together in a very spontaneous and simple way. So the quality of the fruit that we have there, those old vines, pre-Phylloxera rustox, that disappeared from Europe during the Phylloxera attack, are still alive in Argentina. We have vineyards, old vineyards that are more than 100-year-old, and we kept that original material that survived in Argentina while it disappeared in the rest of the world. So here we have a great example of that, our La Consulta Select, that is a co-fermentation between 6 different varietals, the best selection of the grapes that grow there very, very well, apart of Malbec. And also the thing that I said before, let me finish my presentation here. Going back to Zoom. No compartir. Sorry, 1 second. It's not easy from my house instead of my office. But the thing is how those phenols that we have here, and we manage those tannins and anthocyans. I'm trying to put it in half English, half Spanish. Anthocyanins. We know that they are like cousins, and they need one from the other. So the most interesting thing about how we manage this is how we decide the peaking moment. So where you have the fruitiness peak here, then you have the aroma ripeness, then you have the phenol ripeness here, and then the sugar ripeness there. We try to put these three ripeness moment the closest possible to get a very fruit-forward wines with softer tannins and a great aging capacity based on the phenol concentration. So this is a little bit the main differences about how we share or how we manage our phenols. We have the same chemistry all around the world, but it's a little bit or with some more detailed explanation about how we manage here on the Southern Hemisphere, specific in this grape growing paradise called La Consulta in the heart of the Uco Valley.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karim. And good luck with your quarantine as well. I am not quarantining myself, but I am actually broadcasting from Italy, where I'm on a trip doing some visiting and not too far from our next stop, actually. So, Greg, if you want to take us virtually, what I did last week live, which was across the Atlantic.
Absolutely. So we're headed, across the equator and the Atlantic, headed to Italy, and more specifically the Veneto. And really, when you're talking Northern Italy, most of the main wine regions are really sit in the foothills of the Alps before you get out to the Po River Valley. And in the Veneto, we are headed to Valpolicella. So here we have the Masi winery, as well as our 5 subzones of Valpolicella Classico, as well as the Masi vineyard. And Amarone, really emerged in the 1950s, relatively recently, but as a huge success. Here we have the Masi winery, we have the drying racks that really increase that power and concentration in the wines. And it's really a specialized process to do it with care and to create the best possible wine finishing up. It's a very, very specialized process, and excited to hear more about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg. And we're going to hear about that from a man who's sitting just a few miles from where I am, the other side of Lake Garda. Andrea Delcin is the Enology Director of Masi Agricola. He's part of the Masi Technical Group, which is a sort of committee that makes a lot of the winemaking and wine growing decisions with Masi under the family there. And he's a native of Conegliano Veneto, which is just to the north of us as well, and a graduate of its famous Institute of Enology, its famous winemaking school. So Andrea, welcome.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here today with you. Great speech from my colleagues. They talked before. It was very, very educative to me, interesting, really interesting. And so it's a pleasure to start for me. My presentation, it's here. So, Masi Mixture is the production of high-class wine. We try to make it rooted in the values of the Venetian territory using principally native grapes. We are close to actually Venice, Verona in the Veneto regions. And Masi is owned since 1772 from Boscaini family. It is 7th generation family, deep rooted in the Valpolicella Classica, owned by Amarone. And so one of the best winemaking regions. And Masi expertise, a few years ago, we expanded it also in Tuscany, in Argentina. And so this is our technical group. I'm a part of it. It's not only one maker, but many, and also vineyards manager and experts. I'm actually part of also as an expert of the OIV, Organization of International Wine and Vine, and the vineyards in the Venetian area. So Veronese vineyards in the classical zone with suitable terrain of optimum. Actually, our soil is for the Costa Sera wine, is the substratum composed of marl and decomposed marly limestone and lies beneath of the soil, which is cool and rich in humus. And we are going deep later on that. Viticulture, its quality begins in the vineyards. Actually, is used targeted and professional vineyards practices, marries the experience of tradition with modern research, aims to maximize quality, personality, and character in each vineyard. So just to keep in mind that also we are linked to the history, and our vineyards are surrounded by walls because we are full of rocks, full of marl, and practically we are living on the sediments of an ancient ocean, which is a very old eruptions. We are talking about 6 million years ago. Or practically we are really rich in calcareous soil. And that's the kind of vines that we have. We have Corvina, Rondinella, Molinara, and the training system is pergola. We call pergola. 90% of our vineyards is in pergola system. I have a few pictures here, more here. And then about the soil, we have different kind of soil, but mostly of them in Valpolicella Classica comes from volcanic eruptions. And it's practically a very old ocean comes up. We are full of fossils, and we are very well known for the Marmo di Verona, Rosso di Verona. It's a red marl typical from Verona. And then you can see the different kind of layers that we have, mostly as calcareous. And then the Guyot, which is 10% of our vineyards with that. And then the kind of grapes that we have here at Masi Agricola, we have Corvina, Rondinella, Molinara, mostly, and Oseleta is an ancient grapes, very interesting. And then we have Trentino, Marzemino, Terol, de Fosco, and Pinot Grigio, Verduzzo. And then in Malbec, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you flip your slides onto presenter mode so we can see the bigger slides? If you go to Impostazione di Visualizzazione up there, the one in the middle, Impostazione di Visualizzazione.
What is that?
Just need to go to, it's up at the very top. Dove è scritto, c'è mostra barra, poi impostazione e poi fine presentazione, quello in mezzo. Okay.
Not working, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Then just keep going, I'm sorry.
So we are well known for the we place the grapes on the bamboo racks, and we make the appassimento because we dry off the grapes after we pick, and we let them for a quite long time. I mean, between 50 to 100 and 120 days on these kind of racks. And interesting is that we place on the bamboo racks because actually is the best support for drying of the grapes. And but today I want to talk to you exactly about the appassimento and how we grow the grapes for the appassimento and what we discover in it. So we have the various uses of appassimento. 100% the grapes from 100% appassimento, and then the blend of with the double fermentation. So we blend the wine with the grapes, semi-dry, and then the blend with wine from fresh grapes and dry grapes. So 100% procedure is harvesting, and then we have appassimento in the fermentation, and then through the barrels. Double fermentation is fresh grapes go through the fermentation, and part of the grapes go through the appassimento, and then we blend it and we make again a re-fermentation. So, and then the blending between fresh and dry. This is the Costa Sera, and actually the vineyards that I'm talking on. We are close to the Garda Lakes, and we are surrounded by hills here, and all the Costa Sera means all the hills exposed to the sunset. So Costa Sera. And then inside our wineries, we have big vats, small barrels, and now I'm coming on my subject. So we have innate quality and acquired quality. With our microclimate and mesoclimate, we have actually our microclimate, and we have our genotype, vegetative expression, photosynthesis, and kinesis of ripening, soil, and fertility. All things that who study viticulture knows very well. But I'm going deep, the difference between pergola and Guyot, and why we choose it. So Guyot, as you can see here, the temperatures that we raise when the temperature of the air is on the surface exposed to the north is 20 degrees. Here is already 20 now exposed to the sun. So we control the temperature on the grape, and we see that we raise also 42 Celsius degrees, but in the pergola we mitigate the temperature because we cover the production. So and the temperature is much lower. So as you can see here, when we have an increase of the temperature, we have after 25, 26 degrees, we start to have a decrease of the quality of the grapes and the phenols specifically, and the tannins. So we actually went deep, and with a microelectronic microscope, we saw that the skins, the differences between stress and thermal stress skins, and how react in fact the berries to the anthocyanins and to the skin hardness is so different between the two system growing system. I mean, pergola, Guyot is much lower than the pergola everywhere, and so the quality is much lower in the Guyot compared to pergola. And then we have an increase of anthocyanins and the skin thickness and polyphenols when we are in the high slopes and we maintain the pergola. If we go to the Guyot, the anthocyanins and the skin thickness is much lower. And then we study also what happened in the berries. This is what we done with Verona University and the Department of Biotechnologies, and with Bordeaux University. We had a genetic approach and chemical approach to the grape that we make, where we done the appassimento. And to determine and identify the genes, so we practically find out that normally genes that are switch off on the vines switch on during the appassimento. So it is practically a still life during the appassimento. So to assess the possible involvement in determining and defining quality characteristic of the dry grape, considering the variety specifics. We did it with Bordeaux University. It was a consortium in the 2007. It was a great study that we done and very interesting. And we compare Corvina, Cabernet, and Syrah. And so just for 100 days, we compare the three varieties. The system here, we extract the RNA, and then we went deep to study what happened inside actually the berries. It was a study with the genetic department, and the gradient intensity of the signal and the gradient in level of the gene expression. And in fact, we found out that the level of expression, it was very high in all the appassimento grapes. Some grapes react differently, but many genes comes out. If you consider that in Cabernet, but especially in Corvina, comes out a lot of different kind of genes, and their expression are enormous. For example, this one, we have caffeic acid, and then lactate, and anthocyanidins, and steel band synthetize, which increase a lot during the appassimento. So when we dry off, it's not only the dry off of the water, but we are increasing a lot the quality of the grapes, and then also the taste of the grapes during the appassimento. Some different between the cultivars. So just to give you here the idea of from the phenylalanine as simple phenols to the transresveratrol, diniferine, and piscidine, and tannins, I'm sorry, here, and the tannins and anthocyanidins, what we produce. But it was interesting to catch where the tannins grow a lot inside the berries, and then ripening and drying off. And what are producing practically during the drying, during the ripening, we never have any steel bands. So we are discovering a sort of new taste, new world of wine with the appassimento. So lactase, which is an enzyme, is quite difficult to control, especially during the vinification, because it changes a lot the organoleptic. So the plant's lactase promote the oxidation, aggregation of the phenolic substance, possible effects on the identity, quantity, protection, extraction. But it's very interesting on the taste level. I mean, it's very tasty. We know that with lactase, we are losing like 10% of the color, but we are increasing 30% of the aromas. And then Germacrest synthetize, which is very interesting on different kind of scientific view, because Germacrest synthetize promote the synthesis of germacrene. So we discovered that the germacrene is repellent compound. So for this, we never have any insects on the grapes on the appassimento, and synthesized by the plants to protect themselves against insects. So in fact, also when we dry off the grapes on the vines, happen the same things. And this is very interesting because we can leave practically on the vines also the grapes without any chemical treatment. And it has odoriferous properties with spicy, woody notes, and which is very interesting for us in our Amarones wines. So here other genes produced. We count about 3,000 in Corvina, and then in Cabernet 3,098. But Cabernet dry off very quickly, and it doesn't produce the substances like germacrene. And then steel band and lactase, here some more interesting. So the characteristic of the post-harvesting drying process is to find out which is the changes suggested by the genetic approach. Effectively determine the distinctive characteristic of the dry grapes for the purpose of the producing wine. So we need to examine very deeply the metabolite and analyze the technological analysis and sensory analysis. So in conclusion, with this, we have the still life of the grapes. We don't know exactly what meaning is of the modulation of each individual gene during the grape drying. However, we do obtain important results through examining the aromatic profile of the grapes, and in particular the wine. The wine is not only correlated with the grapes' aromas, but also with the drying process or with how fermentation takes place. The interesting unknown factor would in any case appear to be hinging on phenomena that take place during the drying process and grapes where this process takes place. The complexity of the aroma of the wine would appear to be inversely proportional to the speed of fermentation and drying. And the last but not least, we have also a slight botrytis attack that you can see here. We are digesting some color also, but we are improving a lot the glycerin and gluconic acid, which is very important for our illusion of sweetness. So I invite you to come to Veneto to visit us at Masi. The Veneto is a land of colors, sounds, and flavors, from nature to art to the savor of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Grazie. That was fascinating. I mean, wow. You start talking about phenols and it's already complex and complicated, but then when you bring in appassimento, it just really gets even more fascinating and complex. So thank you very much. I want to congratulate our editor-in-chief and publisher, Meredith May, for actually, this was her brainchild to come up with this theme. And I think it's been absolutely fascinating. And I want to thank all of our panelists for the incredible information that they have provided. A lot of education here today. And I also want to thank the 3 vineyard dogs that we got to see. That was great. Maybe this is a new thing. We should encourage some more vineyard dogs on the presentations. So it's all good. And I'm going to swing it back to Lynn for a second to remind us about the incentives and the timings that we have coming up with Somm Foundation. Lynn.
Hi, everyone. So we have our essay prompt ready for you. We're going to send this out to you in an email later today, but if you want to know it now, the question is, how would you describe phenolics and in what ways do they affect the color and texture of wine? So start thinking on that. We'll post the session on our website as soon as it's available. Again, you'll have until midnight Pacific on Tuesday, July 20th to submit your essay. Please keep it to 500 words or less. And we'll be announcing the winners by the 28th of July, and good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, Lars.
Thank you, Lynn. And I say good luck trying to say all that in less than 500 words. But I think everybody's up to the challenge. So reminder that this recording will be on sommjournal.com. It's also on our Facebook platform. You can see the recording there as well. And please do check out our seminar schedule for coming up for the rest of the series. I think we'll be back in August. I don't have that date in front of me right now, but also remember that there will be a written recap of this webinar in upcoming issue of the Somm Journal. So stay tuned for that. And thank you all for tuning in today. And we went a little bit over our normal time, but wow, what incredible information we all got. So thank you very much, folks. Take care. Signing off with the Somm Journal until next time. And thank you, Somm Foundation and Nat Geo. Bye.